Tuesdays had a rhythm of their own. For me, Carol Henderson, they carried a quiet sort of comfort, a hush that had wrapped itself around my life ever since Richard passed away, and the kids, one by one, had packed their lives into boxes and dreams and gone chasing them beyond the fences of our little cul-de-sac. The house wasn't silent. Exactly. There were creaks and birdsong and the dependable hum of the refrigerator, but it was still enough for a woman like me to hear the whispers of memory. It was late morning. The sun filtered through the kitchen window, not in a grand or cinematic way, but with that soft golden hue that made even dust motes look magical. Light broke against the rim of my mug, catching the gentle curls of steam rising from my second cup of coffee. It was one of those slow sips where you cradle the warmth and let it hold you. I'd finally worked up the nerve to tackle the den. 6 months of procrastination piling up in books I loved too much to give away and not enough to shelve. Richard used to call it my paper garden, said I grew stories like I grew marigolds, wildly, sentimentally, and without restraint. The doorbell rang just as I reached for the step stool.
Now.
Doorbells in my world weren't everyday affairs anymore. A package delivery, maybe. Martha from next door dropping in to share gossip or her lemon bars. But a ring at 11 a.m.? That was enough to stir a little butterfly of curiosity in my chest. I wiped my hands on my apron, one of Richard's old ones, blue plaid, soft from years of use, and made my way to the door. I peeked through the peephole. There stood a young man, tall, a little awkward in his stance, as though unsure whether to ring again or walk away. A book was tucked neatly under one arm. Sandy blonde hair, unruly in the same way I remembered it, stood like a crown of sunlight above eyes I couldn't see yet, but instinct told me they'd be blue.
Familiar.
It hit me like a wave of nostalgia and surprise. Liam, Tom and Sarah's boy from across the street. I hadn't seen him in years, not really, not since he left for college. He must be, 27? Maybe 28 now. Gone was the boy who rode bikes and skipped rocks. In his place stood a man, lanky but grown, with a presence that made the porch feel somehow smaller. I opened the door, and the smile came naturally, genuine, surprised, warm. Liam, what a surprise. Come on in. His smile matched mine, only shyer. One of those smiles that barely lifts the corners at first but slowly stretches, creasing into the corners of his bright blue eyes. Sarah's eyes. Hi, Mrs. Henderson, he said. His voice deeper than I remembered, but still laced with something gentle. Hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all, dear, I replied. I was just psyching myself up to battle a mountain of books. I stepped aside, motioning him in. The scent of my home, lemon polish, old paper, and something that always reminded people of cookies even when I hadn't baked, greeted him like an old friend. He stepped into the hallway slowly, as if taking it all in again. The same wooden floor, the same faded rug, the photos on the walls that hadn't changed, not really. And yet, time had passed in this space, quietly and fully. As I closed the door behind us, I felt the stirrings of something rare, an unexpected visit on an ordinary day. The kind of moment that reminds you life isn't done surprising you yet. The knock on the door was soft, almost hesitant. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel as I walked to answer it, not expecting anyone at this hour. When I opened the door, there stood Liam, tall and slightly awkward in that way young men often are when they're holding something delicate. In his hands was a worn copy of Tequila Mockingbird, its spine creased and cover faded, the kind of book that had passed through many hands, absorbing stories beyond the ones printed in its pages. Mom asked me to return this, he said, holding it out gently, like it was something sacred. It was an old, well-loved copy. She finished it last week, and, well, you know Mom, she gets sidetracked. I couldn't help but chuckle, the corners of my mouth lifting into a smile that was both fond and familiar. That she does, I agreed, taking the book from him with both hands. Thank you, Liam. There was a pause, the kind that hovers uncertainly in the air between people who know each other well enough to feel comfortable, but not so well as to always know what to say next. And before I could think better of it, the words slipped out, warm and automatic, like muscle memory formed over years of neighborly habits. Would you like to come in for a moment? I just brewed a fresh pot of coffee, or maybe some iced tea. It's warming up out there. He hesitated, and for the briefest moment, I thought he might decline. But then, with a small, almost sheepish smile, he nodded. Coffee sounds great, actually, if it's no trouble. No trouble at all, I replied, stepping aside and leading him through the familiar archway into my kitchen. The room was bathed in late afternoon sunlight, filtering through lemon-yellow curtains that fluttered slightly with the breeze from the open window. The walls were painted a cheerful buttercream yellow, lined with shelves cluttered with ceramic canisters, spice jars, and dog-eared recipe books. A chubby blue jay perched on the feeder outside the window, squawking as though he owned the place. Liam sat down at the small round table, its red and white checkered tablecloth slightly askew from my earlier lunch. He placed the Harper Lee novel carefully in front of him, like it still held part of the story his mother had read. He looked a little out of place there in his simple t-shirt and jeans, in a kitchen that smelled of cinnamon and rosemary and home. But there was an ease to his posture, a quiet comfort, like he'd been here once as a boy and his body remembered even if his mind didn't. So, I asked, reaching for the coffee pot, how have you been, Liam? Last I heard, you were working, was it in the city? Something in tech. He nodded. Accepting the mug, I handed him with both hands. The steam curled lazily into the air, carrying the rich, earthy aroma of freshly brewed beans. Yeah, he said. Software development. It's interesting, keeps me busy. He took a sip, and something softened in his face, like the steam from the coffee had settled into his bones and pulled out a little of the tension. This is really good coffee, Mrs. Henderson. Call me Carol, please, I said with a gentle laugh. Mrs. Henderson makes me feel like I should be teaching piano lessons and handing out Werther's originals. A genuine smile bloomed across his face, broad and real, the kind that rewrites a person's whole demeanor in an instant. Carol. Okay. Cinnamon, huh? He glanced at the mug in his hands, then back at me with a touch of wonder. I'll have to remember that. You should, I said, smiling into my own cup. Some things, like good coffee and old books, are meant to be remembered. And for a little while, the kitchen was quiet, filled only with the soft sounds of coffee being sipped, pages rustling in memory, and the distant call of a blue jay outside the window, like a gentle reminder that the best parts of life are often the smallest. He stood quietly for a moment, his eyes drifting slowly around the kitchen like someone reacquainting themselves with a childhood memory they didn't know they missed. His gaze paused on the corkboard near the old landline, faded snapshots of my kids frozen in time, bright smiles and scraped knees. There was a photo of Richard and me, arms around each other, laughing beneath a lazy sunset on some long-forgotten beach vacation. He took it all in with an odd sort of reverence. It's nice in here, homie, Liam said, his voice rough around the edges, but touched with something gentle. Smells like my grandma's house used to. That simple, offhand comment hit me harder than I expected. It curled into my chest like a warm breeze slipping under a door. My grandmother's kitchen had been just like this, small, a little cluttered, but always glowing with quiet joy. The scent of cinnamon and soap, the hush of safety. I felt tears sting behind my eyes, but I smiled instead. Thank you, Liam, I said softly. That's a lovely compliment. We sat in a silence that wasn't awkward, but full, rich with things unsaid and a history too long to fit into one afternoon. The old grandfather clock ticked steadily from the hallway, each second a slow heartbeat. Outside, the distant hum of a lawnmower added a low harmony to the stillness inside. I glanced at his hands, resting gently around the coffee mug I'd given him. Long fingers, lean and assured, no longer the soft hands of the boy I used to know. There were faint ink smudges on his right index finger, like tiny signatures from a private world of thoughts. He'd been writing, it seemed, still chasing words like his father used to. Trying to ease into conversation, I nodded towards the worn copy of Tequila Mockingbird sitting on the table between us. So, did you enjoy the book? I asked, my voice casual, my heart not so much. He looked up slowly, his expression softening in a way that surprised me. I actually reread parts of it, he said, his voice quieter now. After Mom was done. It's been years, but it's still powerful, still holds up. It really does. I agreed, leaning back in my chair, letting the nostalgia wrap around us. Atticus Finch was always a hero of mine. Mine, too, he replied almost instantly. Then, after a pause, he added, makes you think about things, doesn't it? About doing the right thing, even when it's hard. That's when he looked directly at me. His blue eyes, a shade too bright to be casual, locked onto mine with a weight I hadn't expected. Not angry, not demanding, just present, fully, vulnerably there. There aren't a lot of Atticuses in the world anymore, are there? His question wasn't rhetorical. It was honest, maybe even a little broken. It caught me completely off guard, cutting through the small talk and landing right in the quiet ache I carried, the one that never really healed. There was something in that moment, a bridge, perhaps, being built between two souls who had once known each other well but had forgotten the shape of each other's hands. A moment that asked not for answers, but for truth. And I realized maybe this conversation wasn't about the book at all. It began with something so ordinary, so effortlessly mundane, that I almost missed the moment it shifted. Liam, the son of my neighbor, had stopped by to return a library book. That was all. No grand gesture. No invitation. Just a tap on the door, a warm smile, and a hey, thought I'd drop this off. I ushered him into the kitchen, still cluttered with the late morning's routines, crumbs from toast, a forgotten grocery list, the faint smell of cinnamon from the tea I had brewed. Sunlight poured through the window, casting a golden haze across the table where we sat. It felt like a safe, familiar space. Predictable. But then, from across the table, as he sipped quietly from the coffee I offered, he asked me something I hadn't expected. Something weightier. The sort of question that doesn't usually surface in broad daylight or over library books. The kind that bubbles up during hushed late-night talks with old friends, or while staring at the ceiling in those lonely, restless hours before dawn. And just like that, everything shifted. There was a tremor in the atmosphere, subtle yet undeniable. The kind that ripples beneath your skin before your mind has even caught up. I felt it before I even fully understood it. The air seemed to thicken. The birdsong outside faded into the background. A kind of stillness settled over us. I leaned in, drawn to the gravity in his voice, not out of politeness, but because something inside me stirred. I needed to hear what he would say next. He didn't wait for an answer. His question hadn't really been directed at me. I realized it was more like a thought escaping, searching for form. Liam's fingers traced the rim of his coffee mug, his eyes distant. Everyone's so quick to judge, he murmured, brows slightly furrowed. So loud with their opinions. But how many people are actually willing to listen? To really stand for something? It's like it's a lost art. His words hung in the air, heavy and real. I nodded, slowly, deliberately. I knew exactly what he meant. The world does feel noisier than it used to, I replied, and not in a good way. My mind drifted, news alerts that never stopped buzzing, comment threads full of venom and offensiveness, the blur of headlines that bled together in one endless scroll. Even though I tried to step back, to stay detached, it always found a way in. The noise, the judgment, the endless need to react. Liam looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Relief, perhaps, or gratitude. Exactly, he said, exhaling softly. I work in tech, you probably knew that. And it's all about connection, right? That's the big pitch. Connect the world, connect the people. But sometimes, he paused, offering a wry smile, sometimes I think we've just found more ways to misunderstand each other. Faster. Louder. He gave a short, almost embarrassed laugh, shaking his head. Sorry, I didn't mean to get all philosophical on you. I don't usually do this. Don't apologize, I said, and I meant it. It's refreshing. And it was. Because when was the last time I had a conversation that felt real? One that wasn't transactional or scripted or interrupted by a ping or a notification. One that didn't require small talk or masks. One that mattered. That morning, in my sun-drenched kitchen, something quietly profound had taken root. Not in the answers we found, but in the questions we dared to ask, and the rare, beautiful stillness of truly listening. We sat beneath the sprawling arms of the old oak tree, its leaves whispering stories above us, casting dappled light on the faded wooden bench. The late afternoon sun filtered through like warm honey, and for a while, silence stretched between us, comfortable, thoughtful. My friends and I began breaking the hush. We usually talk about our gardens, about our grandchildren, the latest aches and pains. Important things, sure, life things, but not often this kind of searching. I paused, watching the young man beside me. There was something quietly unsettling, yet profoundly refreshing, about the depth of his questions. It's a valid thought, I added, and honestly, a little surprising to hear from someone your age, if you don't mind me saying. He chuckled, not offended in the least. I guess I'm just an old soul. He replied with a grin that was almost boyish in its sincerity. Or maybe it's the books, he added, eyes glinting with a kind of reverence. Mom always said I had my nose in a book from the moment I could read. Yours included, he said, nodding toward the well-worn copy of Mockingbird sitting between us on the bench. This one, The Great Gatsby, Fahrenheit 451. They make you think. I smiled, warmed by his words, yet swept into a tide of memory. They do indeed, I murmured, my mind wandering to the dusty shelves in my den. So many books, so many pages. Some dog-eared, others pristine. All of them silent companions to a lifetime spent seeking meaning. It's funny you mentioned Fahrenheit 451. I continued, my voice softer now, more reflective. I was just thinking about rereading it. It feels more relevant than ever these days, doesn't it? The idea of knowledge being dangerous, of people willingly giving up the right to think for themselves. Liam's eyes lit up with a spark that reminded me of fire catching kindling. It really does, he said with sudden intensity. The way Beatty talks about why books had to be burned, it's chilling. Because you can see shades of it happening today. People choosing easy entertainment over anything that makes them uncomfortable or forces them to reflect. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, the earlier shyness gone. In its place was a passionate urgency. I actually tried to talk about it with some guys at work, he said. And they just looked at me like I had two heads. Like I was crazy for caring so much about a book, or for thinking that what we read actually matters. I watched him closely, moved by the sincerity in his voice. There was something so profoundly human in that moment. Not the youthful thirst for knowledge, but the deeper ache to connect, to find someone who sees the world and all its contradictions, the way you do. He shook his head with a quiet laugh, but there was pain behind it too. Sometimes I wonder if people just stopped wanting to understand things. The breeze stirred again, lifting a few strands of his hair, and I reached out, gently placing my hand over his. Don't stop wondering, I said. Don't stop asking. It's people like you who keep the fire burning. He looked up, and for a fleeting second, I saw myself in his eyes, not as I am now, but as I once was. Curious, hopeful, a little lonely, maybe, but determined to make sense of the world through stories. We sat in silence again, but this time it was charged with meaning. Not the absence of words, but the presence of understanding. And somehow, under the oak, surrounded by the quiet hum of nature and the weight of shared thought, it felt like a page had turned. Not just in a book, but in both our lives.